Here. Sorry I couldn't be here today, but we're going to be starting Unit 8, Quiz 2 review, just a kind of brief overview before you take that quiz. Now remember when you're solving radical equations that radical has to be completely isolated on one side before you can solve. So for example, see how the square root of x plus 2 is completely isolated on that side? That means you can actually go through and square both sides. And when you square a square root, you're just left with what's underneath, so that's going to be x plus 2. And then 7 squared is going to give me 49. So now I need to solve for x. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2 from both sides, and I get that x is equal to 47. So that's my final answer for number 1. Taking a look at number 2, before I square anything, I want to make sure I bring anything that's not inside the radical over to the other side. So I'm going to start by subtracting 4 from both sides. And then I get the square root of 4n plus 6 is equal to 14 minus 4, which is 10. And now I want to go and square both sides because that radical is completely isolated by itself. So the square of the square root of 4n plus 6 is just going to be 4n plus 6. And when I square 10, it's going to give me 100. So then I'm going to go ahead and I am going to subtract 6 from both sides. So I get 4n is equal to 100 minus 6, which is going to give me 94. Then I can go ahead and divide both sides by 4, and that ends up giving me that n is equal to 23.5. So that is our final answer for number 2. Let's take a look at number 3. Again, we need to make sure that radical is completely by itself. So first thing I'm going to do is subtract 10 from both sides. So I have 2 times the square root of n is equal to a negative 10. Now I need to isolate that radical some more, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2, and I end up getting the square root of n is equal to negative 5. So here what I have is a radical set equal to a negative number, and that can never happen. So my answer for number 3 is actually no solution because I have that radical set equal to a negative number. Now let's take a look at number 4. You notice that radical is completely isolated, so I can go ahead and I can square both sides. So when I square a square root, I'm left with 5x plus 14, and that's going to be equal to x squared. Now I like to keep my x squared positive, so what I actually do is subtract both of those over to the other side. So I get 0 on this side, and then I get x squared minus 5x minus 14. So now this is a quadratic, so in order to solve it we need to use the quadratic formula or the zero product property. Now I usually use the zero product property, so we're multiplying to 14 and adding to negative 5. So that's going to be negative 7 and positive 2. So now we're going to go ahead and set that up for factoring. So I have x squared minus 7x plus 2x minus 14, and that's equal to 0. So I can go ahead right here and make my two groups. So all I did was split up that negative 5x to be negative 7x and 2x. So between x squared and 7x, I can take out an x, and then I'm left with x minus 7. And then out of the second group, we could take out a 2, and then I'm left with x minus 7, and that's equal to 0. So what I notice here is that my leftovers are matching, so I can go ahead and factor those out. And once I've gotten rid of those, I'm going to write what's left over in a second parenthesis, which is x plus 2. And that's going to be equal to 0. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to set each of these factors equal to 0. So x minus 7 is equal to 0, as well as x plus 2 is equal to 0. So here I get that x is equal to 7, and here I get that x is equal to negative 2. So those are my two possible answers. Now I actually have to go through the work of checking to make sure they work. Please actually show this work. You will lose points if you do not. So we have 5 times 7 plus 14 is equal to 7. Well, 5 plus 7 is 35, plus 14 is 49. So I get the square root of 49 is equal to 7. Square root of 49 is 7. So I get that 7 is equal to 7 as our final answer for that one. So x is equal to 7 does work. So then when I take a look, and you do have to actually test out this next one. 5 times a negative 2 plus 4 is equal to 2. 14, sorry, and then I end up getting the square root of 4 is equal to negative 2. Well, we can't have it equal, the radical equal to a negative number, so x is equal to negative 2 is an answer we throw out. Again, I do want you to actually show the work that you have checked it. All right, let's take a look at this one right here. Find the missing side length of the right triangle if A is equal to 6 and B is equal to 10. If necessary, write it as a simplified radical. So we're using that Pythagorean theorem, which is A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. So we have our A and our B. So 6 squared plus 10 squared is equal to C squared. 36 plus 100 is equal to C squared. So what I end up getting is that C squared is equal to 136. So what I need to do to solve for C is to take the square root of both sides. So I get C is equal to the square root of 136. So now I need to write this as a simplified radical. 136 is divisible by 2, and then 68. 68 you can divide by 2, and that goes into 34. And 34 you can break down to 2 and 17. So here's what I end up having when I write it all underneath the radicals. I have 2 times 2 times 2 times 17. If you look at the ends of each of the legs. So what I have is a pair of 2's, and everything else is going to stay underneath the radical. Well, when I take out that pair of 2's, I'm just going to write 2, and left underneath the radical is 2 times 17, which is 34. So I get 2 times the square root of 34 as my hypotenuse for number 5. Let's take a look at number 6. We need to determine if the side lengths form a right triangle. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the two smaller sides and square them and add them together. And that's going to be equal to the larger side squared. Well, 45 squared is 2,025. 60 squared is 3,600. 75 squared is 5,625. So we're trying to see if those two values are equal. So I'm going to take and add those two together, and I get 5,625 is equal to 5,625. So are those two equal? Yes, they are. So that since the answers are equal, that makes it a true right triangle. Let's take a look at this distance formula one, but I'm actually going to do it as a Pythagorean theorem word problem, okay? So Mrs. Johnson decides to walk to school today. How far is her home after walking 4 miles east? So she's walking 4 miles this way and then 6 miles south. And so Mrs. Johnson isn't going to walk all the way east and then all the way south. She's going to cut down that hypotenuse. So I'm going to do this one as a Pythagorean theorem. You could do it as a distance formula if you wanted to, and then do 4, -6, and then calculate the distance if you wanted to. I think it's just easier to look at it as a right triangle. So then what we're going to do is we're going to do 4 squared plus 6 squared is equal to C squared. So 4 squared is 16 plus 36 is equal to C squared. So that's that distance that we're trying to find for Miss Johnson. So I get that C squared is equal to 52. So then to get C, I need to take the square root of both sides. So C is equal to the square root of 52. Now I need to divide this. Well, 52 is divisible by 4, so I get 4 and 13. Well, 13 is a prime number. It cannot be broken down anymore. And 4 I can break down to 2 and 2. So I can take out a pair of 2's. And then left underneath the radical is 13. So Mrs. Johnson walks 2 square root of 13, and then our label is miles. Remember, guys, that it is extremely important that you guys actually write the label because you will lose points and it will be very sad for you. Okay? All right, let's take a look at number 8 using that distance formula. Find the distance between the points 9, -2 and 21, 7. Now remember that I like to do x1, y1, and then x2, y2, and label it to help myself out. So what I have is the square root. You will need to have this formula memorized, so make sure it's in your noggin. I have x2 minus x1, quantity squared, plus y2 minus y1. Now remember that when you subtract a negative, it becomes plus a positive. So 21 minus 9 is going to give me 12, and that's going to be squared. And then plus 7 plus 2, because I subtracted a negative, is 9. So I have 12 squared plus 9 squared. Well, that's going to give me the square root of 144 plus 81. And that's going to be the square root of 225. Again, here's where knowing your perfect squares comes in handy, okay? Because I know that 225 is the perfect square and that the square root of 225 is just 15. So that's your final answer for number 8. Now let's go ahead and let's take a look at number 9. So for number 9, you're going to have x1, y1, and then x2, y2. So let's go ahead and let's calculate that out. So we're going to do the square root of x2 minus x1. Remember, when you subtract a negative, it's going to become plus a positive, plus y2 minus y1, and that quantity squared. So there we get 1 plus 1 is 2 squared, plus negative 5 minus 1. Now, when you take a negative and you subtract, it's going to get more negative. So you're going to get negative 6 squared. So 2 squared is 4, and then negative 6 squared is 36. So what I end up getting is the square root of 40. So then I'm going to go ahead and break that down. Well, 40 breaks down to 4 and 10, and 4 breaks down to 2 and 2, and 10 breaks down to 5 and 2. So what I can take out is a pair of 2's. So when I take out a pair of 2's, I have that on the outside, and then 5 times 2 is 10 left underneath the radical. So that right there is your final answer for number 9. Now let's take a look at this problem here. So Mr. Cush, Mr. Berg, and Mr. Miller are getting ready for their feature at the Pep Fest. Mr. Cush is standing 7 feet to the right and 3 feet in front of Mr. Berg. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Mr. Berg at the origin. Now Mr. Cush is going to be 7 feet to the right, which is going to be about here, and 3 feet in front of, which is about here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to label that point. He went over 7 and up 3. Now, Mr. Miller, however, is 6 feet to the left and 8 feet in front of. So that's about there. Now, remember that left is negative. So he went left 6 and up 8. So now all I'm doing is calculating the distance between those 2 points. So I'm going to go ahead and label my points so I can keep track. X1, Y1, x2, y2. If you did it the other way with your x2's, if you had these two flip-flopped, that's okay as long as your x1 and your y1 and your x2 and your y2 are in the same parenthesis. So let's go ahead and let's calculate out the distance formula. So I have x2 minus x1. When you subtract a negative, it's going to become plus a positive, plus y2 minus y1. So then what I end up getting is the square root of 7 plus 6, which is 13 squared, and then 8, or 3 minus 8, which is negative 5 squared. So then 13 squared is 169, and then negative 5 squared. Remember, whenever you square a negative number, it's always going to become positive. So please make sure you're putting those parentheses around the negative side. So 169 plus 25 is going to give us 194. So what I have here is the square root of 194. So then I need to check to make sure I can't take out any pairs. So I divided it by 2, and I got 2 and 97. Well, I can't break that down into any pairs. So square root of 194 is the final answer. Now I just need to have a label, and it looks like we're labeling it in feet. So I have the square root of 194 feet. So that concludes your note video for today. So you can go ahead, or your review video, so you can get the quiz from the sub. Please make sure you have all your assignments in, or I will recycle it. And also please make sure that you are quiet for the rest of the period. Thank you for listening.